I sat alone in my small room at Sunset Gardens retirement home, staring at the final papers that would transfer my $5 million estate. My daughter Diana had dropped me off 3 months ago with barely a backward glance, never imagining I would find the strength to reclaim not just my dignity, but my power. The pen felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the decades of giving that had brought me to this moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The walls of my room at Sunset Gardens were painted a soft beige, intended to be soothing, I suppose, but they reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. I'd decorated as best I could with photographs and a small orchid that Randy had given me for my 75th birthday last year. Randy had been gone for almost 2 years now, taken by a sudden heart attack while trimming the roses in our garden. The garden he'd lovingly tended for 43 years of marriage. I reached for the small jewelry box on my nightstand, opening it to touch the emerald pendant that had been Randy's last gift to me. The staff had warned me not to keep valuables in my room, but I couldn't bear to part with it. Some things were worth the risk. Randy had saved for months to buy it for our 40th anniversary, even though I'd told him I didn't need expensive gifts. "Gloria," he'd said, placing it around my neck. "Sometimes the things we don't need are exactly what we deserve." Deserve. The word lingered in my mind like an unanswered question. What did I deserve after a lifetime of giving? Certainly not to be deposited in this place like an unwanted package, my decades of sacrifice reduced to an inconvenience. I thought of my sprawling colonial home on Maple Street, the home where I'd raised Diana and her brother Keith, now sitting empty while Diana debated whether to sell it or rent it out. Either way, she'd made it clear the proceeds would go toward her children's college funds. After all, as she'd explained so practically, I wouldn't be needing it anymore. The routine at Sunset Gardens was mind-numbingly predictable. Breakfast. At 7:30, always lukewarm and bland. Activities in the common room at 9 tak, usually bingo or crafts designed for children but deemed appropriate for the elderly. Lunch at noon, rest period until 2 more activities, dinner at 5:30, and television in the common room until 8 hours, when the night staff encouraged everyone to return to their rooms. Days blurred into weeks, my existence reduced to check marks on the staff's daily logs. The only bright spot had been meeting Juliet, a retired literature professor who had moved in a month after me. Unlike most residents who seemed resigned to their fate, Juliet's eyes still sparkled with intelligence and rebellion. "They may have our bodies in this place," she'd whispered during our second conversation, "but they don't have to have our minds." We'd formed an immediate alliance, sharing books from the understocked library and exchanging whispered criticisms of the infantilizing treatment we received. It was Juliet who first suggested I could do something more with my money than simply leave it to Diana as planned. "Gloria," she'd said over a game of chess in the corner of the common room, "have you considered that your financial decisions could be your final act of self-determination?" I looked up from the board, startled by the directness of her question. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, moving her queen with deliberate precision, "that the way they treat us, your daughter included, suggests they've already written the end of our story, but the pen is still in your hand." That conversation had sparked something in me, a small flame of resistance that had grown steadily over the past weeks. I began to see my financial resources not as an inheritance to be passively transferred, but as a tool, perhaps the last significant tool at my disposal. The day after that chess game, I'd called my longtime attorney, Trip Harrington. Trip had handled Randy's and my affairs for over 20 years and had been horrified when I told him about my current living situation. "Gloria, I had no idea," he'd said, his voice tight with concern. "Randy would be beside himself if he knew." "Well, Randy isn't here," I'd replied, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. but I am, and I need your help. Tripp had arrived at Sunset Gardens the very next day, impeccably dressed as always, carrying his worn leather briefcase and a box of my favorite lemon tarts from Bellini's Bakery. The staff had escorted him to my room with deferential smiles. Amazing how the presence of a well-dressed attorney could suddenly improve the service. "Your finances are in excellent shape, Gloria," Tripp had explained, spreading documents across my small desk. "Randy's life insurance, your investments, the house. Conservatively, we're looking at an estate worth approximately $5 million. The number had startled me. Randy and I had always lived carefully, investing wisely but never extravagantly. Our philosophy had been to build security for our children's future, not to indulge ourselves. The irony wasn't lost on me that those careful decisions had created the very fortune that now seemed to be the only thing my daughter valued about me. "What are my options?" I'd asked Tripp. "Legally?" "Almost unlimited," he'd responded with a small smile. "It's your money, Gloria. Despite what Diana might assume, you haven't signed over any control." That conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Tripp had made several more visits, each time bringing more documents, more possibilities, more pieces of the plan that was slowly taking shape in my mind. A plan that Diana would never expect from her compliant, self-sacrificing mother. This morning, I'd received a text from Diana, not a call, a text, informing me that she would be too busy to visit this weekend as initially promised. Jenna's dance recital and Tripp Jr.'s soccer tournament were taking up the entire weekend, and she'd try to swing by sometime next week, if her schedule allowed. 3 months ago, such a cavalier dismissal would have brought me to tears. Today, it only hardened my resolve. I fingered the emerald pendant again, remembering Randy's face when he'd given it to me. "You've spent your life giving to others, Gloria," he'd said. "It's time you had something just for you." My entire life had been shaped by the belief that my value lay in what I could provide for others: my husband, my children, my community. I'd been raised to believe that selflessness was the highest virtue, especially for a woman. Now, sitting in this sterile room that wasn't home, surrounded by strangers who knew nothing of my life's journey, I wondered if I had confused selflessness with self-erasure. I glanced at the clock on the wall, nearly time for my final meeting with Tripp. I tucked the emerald pendant safely back in its box and stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt with hands that had raised children, tended gardens, and nursed a husband through his final days. These same hands were about to sign documents that would change everything, for me, for Diana, and for the legacy I would leave behind. The time for giving without boundaries had ended. The time for reclaiming my worth had begun. That evening, I pulled out the small leather-bound notebook Randy had given me on our last anniversary together. "For your thoughts," he'd written on the first page, "because they've always mattered more than you believe." The notebook had remained empty until now, but tonight, I needed to organize my thoughts before my meeting with Tripp tomorrow. Diana had called unexpectedly after sending her text, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt. The conversation played over in my mind as I uncapped my pen. "Mom, I was thinking maybe we could bring the kids to visit next month," she'd said, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness she used when discussing the retirement home. "Jenna's been asking about you." "That would be nice," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How are things at the house?" A slight pause. "Oh, we've been doing some updates. Stephen thinks we could get at least $800,000 if we decide to sell. The market in Oak Ridge is really hot right now." My house. The home Randy and I had purchased when Diana was just 3 years old. The home where Keith had taken his first steps, where family Christmases and birthdays had been celebrated for decades. Now discussed as a simple financial asset. "I see," I said. "And have you decided what you're going to do with it?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Well, it doesn't make sense for it to just sit empty, Mom. We're thinking of listing it next month. The realtor says spring is the best time to sell. I gripped the phone tighter. And you've already removed my belongings? Another pause. Longer this time. We've been sorting through things. Honestly, Mom, there's so much stuff. You really won't need all of it at Sunset Gardens, and we thought it would be easier for everyone if we just handled it. I closed my eyes, picturing Diana and Stephen moving through my home, deciding what had value and what didn't, making decisions about my life's collections without my input or consent. I'd like my emerald earrings, I said suddenly. The ones that match this pendant. They should be in my jewelry box in the bedroom. Oh. Diana sounded surprised. I'll have to look. Jenna might have them. She was trying on some of your things, and you know how she loves emeralds. Jenna was trying on my jewelry. My 16-year-old granddaughter was playing dress-up with my possessions while I sat in a retirement home, effectively erased from my own life. I'd like them back, Diana, I said firmly. Mom, they're just sitting in a box. Jenna would actually wear them. They're mine, I said, my voice steady, and I'm asking for them back. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Fine, Diana finally said, her tone cooling. I'll look for them. Anyway, I should go. Tripp's got a big presentation tomorrow, and I need to help him prepare. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, the phone in my lap, staring at the wall. That conversation contained everything I needed to know about my place in Diana's life, a combination of obligation and inconvenience, with my possessions and my fortune far more interesting than my presence. Now, looking at Randy's notebook, I began to write. Not a journal entry, but a list. A reckoning. The first item, what I gave to Diana and Keith college educations, fully paid down payments on their first home's interest-free loans, never repaid, for Diana's business startup and Keith's divorce settlement childcare for Jenna and Tripp Jr. 3 days a week until I was 72 financial support during Diana and Stephen's rough patch when his company downsized. The second item, what they gave to me. Birthday calls, usually late. Christmas visits, increasingly shorter. Decisions about my life without my inputter room. At Sunset Gardens, the imbalance was stark when laid out in black and white. But more disturbing was the realization that I had enabled this dynamic. My children had learned to see me as a resource rather than a person because I had taught them that lesson through decades of unreciprocated giving. I turned the page and wrote, Plan for the future. Below it, I began outlining the ideas Tripp and I had discussed. With each point, I felt a growing sense of clarity and purpose that had been missing since Randy's death. A knock at my door interrupted my writing. It was Juliet, elegant as always in her silk scarf and perfectly tailored pants. "Walk with me in the garden?" she asked, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. "I've found a bench hidden behind the rhododendrons where the staff won't bother us." Outside, the April evening was cool but pleasant. Sunset Gardens did have one redeeming feature. Its landscaping was beautiful, with winding paths and carefully tended flower beds. We made our way to Juliet's secret bench, nodding politely to the few other residents enjoying the evening air. "You seem different today," Juliet observed once we were seated. "You've made a decision, haven't you?" I smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "To someone paying attention, yes. There's a directness in your gaze that wasn't there before." She settled, back against the bench. "Tell me." I shared the outline of my plan, watching her expression shift from interest to delight, to something approaching admiration. "Gloria," she said when I finished, "that is the most magnificently appropriate response to disrespect I've ever heard. Randy would be proud." The mention of Randy brought a bittersweet pang. "I'm not sure. He always believed in giving the children everything," Juliet snorted. "And look where that got you." No, dear. I think Randy would understand that sometimes love requires teaching hard lessons. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of pink and gold. Something loosened in my chest. The beginnings of freedom. Perhaps. The knowledge that my story wasn't over, that I still had chapters to write. Will you tell Keith about your plans? Juliet asked eventually. I sighed. Keith lives in Seattle now. We speak maybe twice a year. He sends birthday cards to the grandchildren he's never met. Your son doesn't know his own children? Different, Keith, I clarified. My son doesn't have children. I was talking about my brother Keith's grandchildren, my great-nieces and nephews. He moved to Florida after his wife died, barely stays in touch. It's just another broken connection in the family. Juliet patted my hand. Families are complex beasts. But remember, Gloria, family isn't just about blood. It's about who treats you like you matter. As darkness fell and we made our way back, inside, I thought about her words. Who in my life treated me like I mattered? The answer was both illuminating and sobering. It was time to redefine family on my own terms. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I dressed with unusual care, selecting my pale blue dress with the pearl buttons, a dress Diana had always complimented. My meeting with Tripp wasn't until 2 in the afternoon, but I wanted to feel composed, dignified. Ready. After breakfast, I joined the regular Thursday morning art class in the activity room, though my mind was far from the watercolor landscapes we were supposed to be creating. Ms. Winters, the young art teacher who visited twice a week, paused beside my chair. That's interesting, Gloria, she said, studying my painting. Everyone else is doing the mountain scene, but you've painted what looks like a legal document? I looked down at my paper, surprised. Without conscious intention, I had indeed sketched what resembled a will or contract, complete with signature lines at the bottom. I laughed softly. I suppose I have other things on my mind today, I said. Well, art is meant to express what's important to us, she replied kindly. And sometimes that isn't mountains and trees. I nodded, appreciating her understanding. Ms. Winters, Jenna, was her first name, though different from my granddaughter in every other way, was one of the few bright spots at Sunset Gardens. Unlike most of the staff who treated residents as either children or burdens, she spoke to us as equals, with genuine interest in our thoughts and experiences. I have a big decision to finalize today, I told her, surprising myself with the disclosure. She sat in the empty chair beside me. Something important? Life-changing, I admitted. For me and for others. She didn't press for details, just nodded. I hope it brings you peace, whatever it is. After art class, I returned to my room to find a message from Tripp confirming our appointment. I spent the remaining hours reviewing the documents he had left with me, making sure I understood every clause, every implication. This wasn't a decision I was making lightly or in anger, though anger certainly would have been justified. No, this was about restoration, restoring balance, dignity, and meaning to what remained of my life. At precisely 2 o'clock, Tripp arrived, looking professional in his navy suit. The nurses at the station smiled and waved him through immediately. Sunset Gardens staff had a remarkable ability to sense wealth and influence. Gloria, he greeted me warmly, setting his briefcase on my small table. You look well today. Have you made your decision? I have, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. I want to proceed with everything we discussed. He nodded, opening his briefcase and removing several document folders. I've prepared everything according to your instructions. I must say, Gloria, I've been practicing law for 30 years, and this is one of the most satisfying revisions I've ever drafted. For the next hour, we went through each document methodically. The revised will, the establishment of the trust, the transfers of property, the letters to be delivered at the appropriate time. With each signature, I felt more certain, more myself than I had in months. "There's one more thing," I said when we had finished the formal documents. "I'd like to make a withdrawal from my accounts. $10,000 in cash." Tripp raised an eyebrow. "That's a substantial amount to have here. Are you sure it's safe?" "It won't be staying here," I said with a small smile. "And I'll need your help with one more matter. There's someone I need to locate." After Tripp left with his briefcase full of signed documents, I felt strangely light, as if I had set down a burden I had been carrying for years. I called Juliet and asked if she would join me for dinner in the private dining room, a rarely used perk that required additional payment, but well worth it for the privacy it would afford us. "My treat," I told her. "I'm celebrating." Over surprisingly decent salmon and asparagus, I filled Juliet in on the day's events. "It's done then?" she asked, raising her water glass in a toast. "All done," I confirmed, clinking my glass against hers. "Now comes the waiting, and the planning for what's next." "What is next?" She leaned forward, curious. I glanced around to ensure no staff were within earshot. "I'm not staying here, Juliet. This place, it's not where I belong." Her eyes widened. "You're leaving Sunset Gardens? Where will you go?" "That's what the $10,000 is for," I explained. "Tripp is helping me locate a lovely woman named Maria, who used to help care for Randy in our home during his final months. She mentioned once that she and her sister rent out a mother-in-law suite on their property. It's small, but it has its own entrance and a little garden patch. But your daughter won't know until it's done," I finished. "She placed me here without my consent. I don't need her consent to leave." Juliet's expression was a mixture of admiration and concern. "What about your medical needs? Your medication?" "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own medication," I said firmly. "And Maria's sister is a retired nurse. Between Medicare and my resources, I can arrange for any care I need without being institutionalized." "It's brilliant," Juliet said after a moment. "Absolutely brilliant, but I'll miss you terribly." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You've been my sanity here, Juliet. And actually, I've been thinking about that too." Her eyebrow arched. "Oh?" "Maria mentioned that the property next door to hers might be coming available for rent soon. It's a small cottage, but it has amazing light, perfect for an artist who also happens to be a retired literature professor." Juliet's mouth dropped open. "Gloria Barnes, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we've both spent enough time living according to other people's plans," I said. "Maybe it's time we made our own." She lifted her water glass again, her eyes now sparkling with something that looked very much like hope. "To new beginnings, then." "To new beginnings," I echoed. That night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking of Randy. What would he say about my plans? About my decision to reshape our legacy in such a dramatic way? In our marriage, he had always been the more accommodating parent, willing to give Diana and Keith whatever they wanted. But he had also been fiercely protective of me. I remembered an argument he'd had with Diana years ago, when she had expected me to cancel a rare weekend trip with friends to babysit Jenna at the last minute. Randy had stood in our kitchen, unusually stern. "Your mother is a person, Diana," he'd said, "not a resource to be tapped whenever convenient." Diana had been shocked by his firmness, unused to hearing no from either of us. But she had found someone else to watch Jenna, and my weekend had been preserved. "I'm still a person, Randy," I whispered to the quiet room. "And I'm finally remembering what that means." The following week brought a flurry of activity as my plans began to take shape. Tripp had located Maria, who was delighted to hear from me and confirmed that the mother-in-law suite was indeed available. "It's nothing fancy, Mrs. Barnes," she warned during our phone call, "but it's clean and private with a small patio where you could put some flower pots." It sounded perfect. We arranged for me to see it the following Tuesday. A visit Tripp would facilitate under the guise of taking me to a specialist appointment. I felt a twinge of guilt about the deception, but reminded myself that I was simply reclaiming the autonomy that had been taken from me. Diana called on Sunday, her voice distracted as she spoke over the background noise of what sounded like a busy restaurant. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in. How are things at Sunset Gardens?" "The same," I replied. "How are Jenna and Trip Jr.?" "Busy as always. Trip Jr. made the varsity baseball team, and Jenna's applying for summer internships. Did you need anything?" "I might. Be able to drop by next weekend." "Might. If it was convenient. If nothing more important came up." "Actually," I said, making a decision, "there is something. I'd like to go through some papers with you. About the estate." There was a slight pause. Then her voice came back with renewed focus. "The estate? You mean your will and everything?" "Yes. There are some decisions to be made." "I could come on Saturday," she said, suddenly finding room in her schedule. "Around 11? "That would be fine," I agreed. After we hung up, I sat for a long time with my thoughts. I wasn't going to tell Diana about my plans to leave Sunset Gardens, not yet. But I did want to see her one more time before everything changed. I wanted to look into her eyes as we discussed the future of the estate she clearly valued more than she valued me. I wanted to remember that conversation when doubts inevitably arose. Tuesday arrived bright and clear. I told the nurse at the IK station that my attorney was taking me to a medical appointment, showing her the note Trip had faxed over the previous day. She barely glanced at it, making a quick note in my file before returning to her gossip magazine. Trip was waiting in the lobby, as distinguished as always in his tailored gray suit. "Ready for your adventure?" he asked with a twinkle in his eye as he escorted me to his car. "More than ready," I replied, feeling a surge of excitement as we drove away from Sunset Gardens. It was only my second time leaving the facility since Diana had brought me there, and the world outside seemed unusually vivid, the colors brighter, the sounds sharper. Maria's home was in a modest neighborhood about 20 minutes away, a well-maintained ranch-style house with flowering shrubs lining the front walkway. Maria herself greeted us at the door, her warm smile exactly as I remembered. "Mrs. Barnes, it's so good to see you," she exclaimed, enveloping me in a gentle hug. At 62, Maria was younger than me but had an ageless quality about her, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Please, call me Gloria," I reminded her. "It's been too long, Maria. Come, let me show you the suite," she said, leading us around the side of the house to a separate entrance. The mother-in-law suite was indeed small, just a bedroom, sitting area, kitchenette, and bathroom, but it was immaculately clean and filled with light from several large windows. French doors opened onto a small patio overlooking a garden area, bursting with vegetables and flowers. "My sister Elena and I live in the main house," Maria explained. "She's at work now. She still does some part-time nursing at the clinic down the street. We had this suite built for our mother, but she passed last year." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said sincerely. Maria nodded in acknowledgement. She had a good long life, and now, perhaps this space can help give you back some of yours? As she showed us the details of the suite, the grab bars in the bathroom, the emergency call system connected to the main house, the raised garden, beds that would be easy to tend from a seated position if necessary, I felt increasingly confident in my decision. This wasn't just an escape from Sunset Gardens. It was a step toward a new kind of independence. "It's perfect," I told Maria when the tour was complete. "When could I move in?" "Whenever you're ready," she replied. The rent we discussed includes utilities and weekly light housekeeping. Elena and I respect privacy, but we're also right next door if you need anything. Trip, who had been taking notes during the tour, looked up. "And you mentioned a cottage. Nearby that might be coming available?" "Yes, just there." Maria pointed to a small white cottage visible through the trees at the edge of the property. "Mrs. Delacourt is moving to Arizona to be near her son next month. It's a bit larger than. This suite has a proper kitchen and a small second bedroom. The landlord is a good man, very responsive about repairs. I thought of Juliet, imagining her in that sun-filled cottage, perhaps painting at an easel by the window. Could you let me know when it becomes available? I asked. I have a friend who might be interested. After finalizing details with Maria and providing the deposit Tripp had prepared, we drove back toward Sunset Gardens. But instead of returning directly, Tripp suggested lunch at a small cafe he knew. It's not often I get to dine with such a revolutionary, he said with a smile as we settled at a corner table. I laughed. Is that what I am, at 77? Absolutely. Most people your age, forgive me, are settling for whatever their families decide is best. You're reclaiming your narrative. It's inspiring, Gloria. Over soup and sandwiches, we discussed the remaining logistics of my plan. Tripp would arrange for my personal items to be moved to the suite next week while Diana was away. At a business conference, information he had discreetly obtained through his son who worked at the same company as Stephen. And you're sure about the changes to the will? Tripp asked, his expression turning serious. There will be significant fallout. I met his gaze steadily. I'm sure. It isn't about punishment, though Diana will certainly see it that way. It's about legacy. What I want my money to say about my values after I'm gone. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolve. Then we proceed as planned. I'll have everything in place before your meeting with Diana on Saturday. As we drove back to Sunset Gardens, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anticipation for my imminent freedom, sadness for the relationship with Diana that had deteriorated so badly, and a quiet determination to see my plan through to the end. Randy had always said I was too accommodating, too willing to put others' needs before my own. I wondered what he would think of me now. Back in my room, I found Juliet waiting, eager to hear about the visit. Her face lit up as I described the suite in the neighboring cottage. It sounds wonderful, she said, clasping her hands. When will you go? Next Thursday, I told her. While Diana's out of town, and as soon as Mrs. Delacourt's cottage becomes available, I'll let you know. Juliet's eyes misted unexpectedly. You know, Gloria, when my daughter placed me here, I thought it was the end. Just waiting rooms and bingo until the final waiting room. But you've shown me there can be another chapter. I reached for her hand. There can be. For both of us. That night, I dreamed of Randy. We were in our garden, the one he had loved so much, sitting side by side on the wrought iron bench beneath the maple tree. In the dream, he turned to me with that half smile that had always been my undoing. You finally figured it out, didn't you? He said. Figured what out? I asked. That you matter too. I woke with tears on my cheeks and his words echoing in my mind. Saturday arrived with a sense of inevitability. I dressed carefully in one of my better outfits, a navy dress with a matching cardigan that Randy had always liked, and added the emerald pendant. It felt important somehow to wear this symbol of Randy's regard during what would likely be a difficult conversation. The staff had reserved one of the small private meeting rooms for my visit with Diana, a courtesy that surprised me until I remembered that Tripp had called ahead to make the arrangements. The room, though bland and institutional like everything else at Sunset Gardens, was at least private, with a small table and 4 chairs. I arrived early, taking the chair that faced the door. At precisely 11, Diana appeared, looking polished and professional in a tailored pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She was 43 now, but still carried herself with the same confidence that had marked her since childhood, a quality that had made her so successful in business and sometimes so difficult as a daughter. Mom, she greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek before sitting across from me. You look nice today. That's Dad's pendant, isn't it? Yes, I replied, touching it briefly. Thank you for coming. Of course. You said you wanted to discuss the estate? She pulled out a small notebook and pen, immediately ready for business. I studied her face, so like Randy's in structure, with his straight nose and determined chin, but with my blue eyes. My beautiful, capable daughter who had somehow learned to see me as a resource rather than a person. "I've been doing some thinking," I began, keeping my voice even. "About the future, about my legacy." "That's good." Diana nodded encouragingly. "It's important to have everything in order. Stephen and I have already updated our wills since Tripp Jr. turned 18. "Yes, having things in order is important," I agreed, "which is why I've made some changes to my will and the distribution of my estate." Diana's pen paused over her notebook. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "Substantial ones," I said. "I've been working with Tripp Harrington to reorganize my assets." A small frown creased her forehead. "You've been meeting with Tripp without telling me?" The hint of betrayal in her voice was almost laughable given the circumstances, but I kept my expression neutral. "He's been my attorney for 20 years, Diana. I don't need permission to consult him." "No, of course not," she backtracked quickly. "I just thought we would discuss these things together. As a family. Like we discussed my move to Sunset Gardens together?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered away for a moment. "That was different. You were struggling alone in that big house after Dad died. We were worried about you." "Were you? How many times did you visit in the month before you suggested this place?" Diana shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I was very busy with—" "Once," I interrupted gently. "You visited once for less than an hour. You said you needed to check if the roof was leaking in the study." A flush crept up her neck. "That's not fair. I call you every week." "For about 5 minutes, usually while you're driving somewhere else, or waiting for an appointment," I noted. "But that's not why I asked you here today." I reached into the folder I had brought and removed several documents that Tripp had prepared for me, simplified versions of the legal papers we had signed, designed to clearly communicate the changes without overwhelming detail. "As you know, your father and I built a substantial estate over our lifetime," I began, my tone businesslike now. "The house, our investments, his life insurance, altogether worth approximately $5 million. Diana nodded, her attention fully focused now. "Yes, and we're so grateful for your and Dad's careful planning. The original plan, as you know, was to divide the estate equally between you and Keith, with some small bequests to charities we supported." "Right," Diana agreed, her pen poised again. "And since Keith rarely even calls, I've been assuming I would handle most of the estate administration when the time comes." The casual presumption in her voice strengthened my resolve. "That arrangement has been changed," I said calmly, sliding the first document across the table. "Effective last week." Diana picked up the paper, her eyes scanning it quickly before widening in shock. "Mom, this says you've placed the majority of your assets in an irrevocable trust. Why would you do that without discussing it with me first?" "Because they're my assets, Diana," I replied simply, "and an irrevocable trust best serves my intentions for them." She continued reading, her face growing increasingly pale. 50% to establish a scholarship fund for nursing assistants seeking to become RNs, 25% to a foundation supporting elder dignity and autonomy. Mom, this leaves only 25% to be divided between me and Keith. "Yes," I confirmed, "and even that portion has conditions attached." She set down the paper, with a controlled but visible effort not to slam it. "What conditions?" I pushed the second document toward her. "The remaining 25% will be held in trust for 10 years after my passing. During that time, you and Keith will receive modest quarterly disbursements. The full remainder will only be distributed if certain requirements are met." Diana scanned the new document, her composure slipping further with each line. "Monthly visits to your grave? Documentation of community service hours? Completion of elder care advocacy training? Mom, this is incentivized inheritance," I supplied, Tripp assures me it's perfectly legal. Legal, maybe, but it's manipulative. Diana's voice rose slightly before she caught herself, glancing toward the door. You're using your money to control us from beyond the grave. I folded my hands calmly on the table. I prefer to think of it as aligning my resources with my values. If my values matter to you and Keith, the conditions will be easy to meet. If they don't, I shrugged lightly. Then perhaps you don't need my money after all. Diana stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Perhaps she was. The mother she knew. The endlessly accommodating, eternally supportive, conveniently invisible mother was indeed gone. Does Keith know about this? She finally asked. Tripp will be informing him next week. I've also arranged for a significant one-time gift to be sent. To him. He's struggling more than he lets on. Diana took a deep breath, visibly trying to regain control of the conversation and her emotions. Mom, I understand you might be feeling overlooked. Perhaps we haven't been as attentive as we should be, but this seems like an extreme reaction. Maybe we should discuss this with Dr. Reynolds. He could help you think through whether these changes truly reflect your wishes. The suggestion that I might need psychiatric evaluation to explain my deviation from her expectations was so predictable. I almost smiled. My wishes are quite clear, Diana, and they're legally binding now. I gathered the documents back into my folder. I didn't ask you here to seek your approval. I asked you here because I felt you deserved to hear this directly from me. She was silent for a long moment, a calculation happening behind her eyes that I recognized all too well. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler, with the persuasive tone she had mastered in childhood. Mom, I know things haven't been easy since Dad died, and maybe we haven't been there for you the way we should have been, but we're still family. Let's take some time to reconsider all this. I could come visit more often, maybe even look into moving you somewhere closer to us. That won't be necessary, I interrupted softly. I've made my decisions, Diana, about the money and about my life. She frowned. What do you mean about your life? I rose from my chair, signaling the end of our meeting. It means I appreciate you coming today. I'll see you when you next visit. Diana stood as well, confusion and frustration warring on her face. Mom, we can't just leave things like this. What did you mean about decisions about your life? Goodbye, Diana, I said firmly, moving toward the door. Drive safely going home. I left her standing there, surrounded by the remnants of expectations I would no longer fulfill, and felt lighter with each step down the hallway. The days following my meeting, with Diana passed in a blur of quiet preparation. She called twice, once on Sunday and again on Monday, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Her messages shifted from concerned to irritated to conciliatory, but I wasn't ready to speak with her again. Not yet. You've created quite the storm, Juliet observed over lunch in the dining room on Tuesday. Your daughter called the front desk this morning, asking if you'd been acting strangely lately. Nurse Blackwood was positively reveling in the drama. I sighed, pushing my overcooked vegetables around my plate. I expected as much. Diana's never handled not getting her way very well. What did Nurse Blackwood tell her? Apparently that I've been my usual self, which Diana could interpret however she likes. I smiled faintly. Little does she know my usual self is currently planning a jailbreak. Juliet chuckled, then leaned closer across the table. Have you told Maria? When to expect you? Thursday, I confirmed. Tripp will come for me after lunch around 2. He's already moved most of my personal items from storage. Diana had packed up my belongings from the house months ago and put them in a storage unit. I've signed a 6-month lease with Maria, with an option to extend. You really thought of everything. I've had nothing but time to think, I replied. That's one thing Sunset Gardens provides in abundance. Back in my room, I continued the methodical process of sorting through my meager possessions. There wasn't much. When Diana had moved me here, she'd allowed only what would fit in 2 suitcases, claiming the rest would be safely stored. I'd since learned most of those items had either been distributed among family members or donated. I separated my things into 3 piles: what would come with me to Maria's, what would be left behind, and what I would give to Juliet. The last pile was small but carefully chosen: a cashmere scarf I knew she had admired, a book of poetry we had discussed, a small watercolor painting of a garden scene I had purchased from the recreational therapist who taught our art class. My plans were proceeding smoothly until Wednesday afternoon, when an unexpected visitor arrived. I was returning from the garden where I'd been sitting with Juliet when I saw Keith standing at the nurse's station, his tall figure instantly recognizable even after so many months. "Mom," he called, catching sight of me. He crossed the lobby in a few long strides, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of the same aftershave he'd worn since college. "Why didn't you tell me things had gotten so bad?" I eased out of his embrace, studying his face. At 45, Keith looked remarkably like Randy. The same thoughtful brown eyes, the same slight furrow between his brows when he was concerned. Unlike his sister, Keith had his father's temperament as well: quieter, more reflective, less driven by ambition. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "Diana called me yesterday in a panic, saying you'd had some kind of breakdown, that you'd rewritten your will and were making irrational decisions. She wanted me to fly down right away and talk some sense into you." I shook my head, unsurprised but still disappointed. "I'm perfectly fine, Keith. No breakdown, no irrationality. Just some long overdue decisions about my own life and resources." He frowned, glancing around the lobby with its institutional furniture and antiseptic smell. "She said you'd changed your will, though. Is that true?" "Yes," I admitted. "Tripp has the details. But the more pressing question is, are you here because you're concerned about me or because you're concerned about your inheritance?" His eyes widened in genuine hurt. "Mom, you know me better than that. I didn't even know the details of your will before Diana called. I assumed you'd leave everything to her anyway, since she's the one who's been handling your affairs." The simple acceptance in his tone reminded me that Keith had always been the more self-sufficient of my children. After college, he had moved to Seattle, built a career in environmental science, and rarely asked for anything beyond our emotional support. In many ways, his independence had made him less present in my daily life than Diana, but also less demanding. "Let's talk in my room," I suggested, leading him down the hallway. Once we were seated, Keith on the single visitor chair, me on the edge of my bed, I explained the changes I had made, including the irrevocable trust and the conditions attached to the remaining inheritance. Unlike Diana, Keith listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful rather than outraged. "So basically, you're ensuring most of your money goes to causes you care about, and the rest goes to me and Diana only if we demonstrate that we care about those things too." He summarized when I finished. "That's a fair assessment," I agreed. "Are you upset?" He ran a hand through his hair, another gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache. "Honestly? No. It's your money, Mom. And after seeing this place—" He glanced around my small room with barely concealed dismay. "I can understand why you might be reconsidering how things have been handled." His reaction bolstered my confidence that I had made the right decision. "There's something else you should know," I said. "I'm leaving Sunset Gardens. Tomorrow, in fact." If I had expected shock, I was disappointed. Keith merely raised an eyebrow. "Good. This place feels like a storage facility for people. Where are you going? Back to the house?" "No." I explained about Maria, the mother-in-law suite, and my plans for greater independence. With each detail, I saw growing approval in his eyes. "Does Diana know about this part of your plan?" he asked when I finished. "Not yet, and I'd appreciate if you didn't tell her right away. I'd like to be settled at Maria's first." He hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Mom, I don't like keeping secrets from Diana. We've never had that kind of relationship. I'm not asking you to lie, I clarified, just to give me a few days head start before the storm breaks. You know how she'll react. Keith sighed heavily. She'll try to convince you that you're making a mistake. She'll probably call your doctor and try to get some kind of competency evaluation. She might even try to get power of attorney. Exactly. And I'd like to be established in my new home, with witnesses to my clear mental competence before I have to deal with all that. He considered this, then nodded slowly. All right. I won't volunteer the information, but if she asks me directly if I know where you are, I won't lie. Fair enough, I agreed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. Thank you for understanding, Keith. It means more than you know. I just want you to be happy, Mom, he said simply. If this is what you need to do, I support it. We spent the rest of his visit catching up on his life in Seattle, his recent promotion, the hiking group he had joined, the woman he had been dating for the past 6 months. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years, unmarred by the undercurrents of expectation and obligation that had long characterized my interactions with Diana. As he prepared to leave, Keith paused at the door. Would it be okay if I visited you? At Maria's, I mean. Not right away, but maybe in a few weeks. The sigh, request so tentative and genuine, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I'd like that very much, I told him. After he left, I sat for a long time looking at the few photographs I had in my room. One showed Keith at his college graduation, Randy and I flanking him with proud smiles. Another captured Diana's wedding day, all of us dressed in our finest, her expression radiant as she looked at Stephen rather than the camera. So many years, so many memories. Not all bad, not by any means. There had been love there, and still was, however complicated it had become. But love without respect was not enough. Love without recognition of personhood was not enough. Tomorrow would bring a new beginning. I was ready. Thursday dawned with unexpected sunshine streaming through my window. I woke early, too excited to sleep, and went through my morning routine with meticulous care. Each small task felt significant, knowing it would be the last time I performed it in this room, in this place that had never been home. I had packed the last of my belongings the night before. Clothing, toiletries, a few books, and the photographs. I treasured most. Everything fit into one suitcase and a small tote bag. The rest, the gifts for Juliet, a few items I was leaving behind, I had arranged neatly on the bed. Breakfast in the dining hall was the same tasteless oatmeal and weak coffee it always was, but today I didn't mind. I smiled at the nursing assistants, exchanged pleasantries with the other residents, even complimented the kitchen staff on the fresh fruit. My good mood earned curious looks, but I didn't care. Freedom was just hours away. After breakfast, I found Juliet in the activity room, pretending to be interested in the puzzle some residents were assembling. When she saw me, she excused herself and joined me in the adjacent sunroom where we often sat. Today's the day, she said, her eyes bright with excitement for me. Yes, I confirmed. Trip will be here at 2. I wanted to give you something before I go. I handed her the small gift bag I had prepared. She opened it slowly, her face softening as she examined each item, the scarf, the book, the painting. Oh, Gloria, these are lovely. Just a few things to remember me by until we can arrange for you to see the cottage next door to Maria's, I said. Maria promised to call as soon as Mrs. Delacourt gives official notice. I'll keep my phone charged, Juliet promised, wrapping the scarf around her shoulders despite the warm day. It's perfect. We spent the next hour talking quietly, making plans for how we would maintain contact during our separation. Juliet had access to a computer in the library and was surprisingly adept with email for someone of our generation. We agreed she would check daily for messages from me. What will you do if Diana tries to bring you back? Juliet asked, voicing the concern that had been lurking at the edges of my mind. "I've prepared for that," I assured her. "Tripp has arranged for a geriatric social worker to evaluate me next week at Maria's, a preemptive assessment of my capacity to make my own decisions. He's also prepared legal documents asserting my autonomy and explicitly revoking any implied consent to Diana's previous arrangements." Juliet nodded approvingly. "You've thought of everything." "I've had months to plan," I reminded her, "and significant motivation." At noon, I joined the other residents for lunch, careful to maintain my normal routine. I even participated in the afternoon medication distribution, accepting the pills I would later discreetly dispose of. I had arranged with my doctor for new prescriptions to be filled at a pharmacy near Maria's home. At precisely 1:45, I returned to my room for my afternoon rest, as noted on my schedule. Instead of resting, I changed into my traveling clothes, comfortable slacks, a blouse in my favorite shade of blue, and a light cardigan. I added the emerald pendant, drawing strength from its connection to Randy, and checked my appearance in the small mirror above the sink. An old woman looked back at me. Certainly, silver hair, lined face, the unmistakable signs of 77 years of living. But her eyes were clear and determined, her posture straight despite the slight stoop of age. She looked ready for whatever came next. A soft knock at exactly 2:00 announced Tripp's arrival. He entered quietly, nodding his approval at my ready state. "All set?" he asked. "More than ready," I confirmed, picking up my tote bag while he took the suitcase. The plan was simple, but required precise timing. Tripp had scheduled an official outing, a visit to my eye doctor, documented in the Sunset Gardens log with a return time of 5:00. By the time anyone realized I wasn't coming back, I would be settled at Maria's, with appropriate legal protections in place. We walked unhurriedly through the corridor, past the nurse's station, where Nurse Blackwood barely glanced up from her computer to wave us through. The lobby was nearly empty except for an elderly man dozing in an armchair and a visitor signing in at the front desk. The sunlight outside was brilliant after the dim fluorescent lighting of Sunset Gardens. I paused for a moment on the front steps, lifting my face to its warmth, breathing deeply of air that wasn't filtered through institutional ventilation systems. "Ready?" Tripp asked again, offering his arm. "Yes," I said, taking it gratefully. "Let's go." His car was parked in the visitor's lot, a sleek black sedan that whispered luxury. He helped me into the passenger seat with courteous efficiency, stowed my luggage in the trunk, and soon we were driving away from Sunset Gardens, away from the half-life I had been living for the past 3 months. I didn't look back. There was nothing there I wanted to see again. The drive to Maria's took just under half an hour. As we turned into her neighborhood, I felt a curious mixture of emotions. Excitement, certainly, but also a thread of anxiety. Was I doing the right thing? Was I truly capable of managing greater independence, or was I simply reacting against Diana's high-handedness? "Having second thoughts?" Tripp asked perceptively, glancing at me as we slowed for a stop sign. "Not second thoughts exactly," I said. "Just acknowledging the magnitude of the change." He nodded. "It's a significant step, but from what I've observed, Gloria, you're more than capable of handling it, and you're not doing it alone. You have Maria, her sister, and me supporting you." His confidence bolstered my own, and by the time we pulled into Maria's driveway, the anxiety had subsided, replaced by renewed determination. Maria was waiting on the front porch, her face breaking into a warm smile as we approached. "Welcome, Gloria. Everything is ready for you." She led us around to the mother-in-law suite's private entrance. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had made the right decision. The space, though small, felt open and welcoming. Maria had placed a vase of fresh flowers on the small dining table, and afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that had been opened to catch the spring breeze. "It's perfect," I told her, turning slowly to take it all in. The compact kitchenette gleamed with clean countertops, The sitting area featured a comfortable-looking armchair and small sofa positioned to enjoy both the television and the view of the garden. The bedroom, visible through an open door, held a neatly made queen bed and a dresser that I recognized as my own, one of the pieces from storage that Tripp had arranged to have delivered. "My sister Elena will be home around 6, Maria said. "She's looking forward to meeting you. We thought you might like to join us for dinner, but only if you're feeling up to it. Otherwise, I've stocked your refrigerator with some basics." Her consideration touched me deeply. "Dinner would be lovely, thank you." After showing me where everything was located, Maria tactfully withdrew, leaving Tripp and me to complete the transition. He helped me unpack my few belongings, placing my clothes in the dresser and arranging my toiletries in the bathroom. "The landline is connected," he confirmed, pointing to the telephone on the bedside table. "And here's your new cell phone." He handed me a smartphone that looked intimidatingly modern. "It's set up with my number, Maria's, and Keith's already programmed in. I'll show you the basics before I leave." I took the phone gingerly. "I've never used one of these. Diana always said I wouldn't be able to figure it out." "It's simpler than it looks," Tripp assured me. "And Maria has the same model. She can help, if you get stuck." Once everything was unpacked and arranged, Tripp guided me through a review of the legal documents he had prepared. The most important was a notarized statement asserting my mental competence and my decision to leave Sunset Gardens voluntarily, signed by both Tripp and a colleague who specialized in elder law. "This should forestall any immediate attempts by Diana to force your return," he explained. "And the social worker's evaluation next week will provide additional protection. After that, we can discuss whether you want to pursue more formal measures, such as a declaration of capacity from the court." The logistics of asserting my independence were daunting, but necessary. I knew Diana well enough to anticipate her reaction to my departure. As Tripp prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Your former address forwarded mail will start arriving next week. I've arranged for your Social Security and pension checks to be direct deposited into your new account at First Regional. The checkbook and debit card are in the desk drawer." "You've thought of everything," I said gratefully. He smiled. "That's what you pay me for. But in this case, it's been a particular pleasure. Not many of my clients stage such elegant rebellions." After he left, I sat for a long time in the armchair by the window, watching birds visit the feeder hanging from a nearby tree. The quiet was different here. Not the sterile silence of Sunset Gardens, but a living quiet, punctuated by natural sounds and the occasional voice or movement from the main house. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not just a patient, not just an elderly mother, not just a checkbook with a pulse, but Gloria Barnes, complete and whole. The emerald pendant caught the late afternoon light, sending small green reflections dancing across the wall. I touched it gently, thinking of Randy. "I made it," I whispered to his memory. I found my way back to myself. My first week at Maria's passed in a gentle rhythm of discovery and adjustment. Each morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through curtains I could open or close as I pleased. I prepared my own breakfast, simple but satisfying, and taken when I wanted, not according to an institutional schedule. Mornings might find me reading in the armchair or tending to the small container garden Maria had helped me start on the patio. Afternoons often included a walk around the neighborhood, sometimes with Maria or her sister Elena, sometimes alone, with my thoughts. It was freedom, modest and circumscribed by the limitations of age, certainly, but freedom nonetheless. On my third day, Tripp called with news I had been both expecting and dreading. "Diana knows you're gone," he said without preamble. "She called Sunset Gardens last night when she couldn't reach you, and they informed her you hadn't returned from your doctor's appointment." I sighed, settling more deeply into my armchair. How did she react? About as expected. She called me in a panic, demanding to know where you were. When I explained you had relocated to a more suitable living arrangement, she expressed her displeasure quite forcefully. I could well imagine. Diana's temper, when provoked, was formidable. Did you tell her where I am? No, as per your instructions. I informed her that you're safe, well cared for, and that you would contact her when you felt ready. I also made it clear that you had left Sunset Gardens voluntarily and that you are fully competent to make your own decisions. And she didn't accept that, I assume? Tripp chuckled. Not immediately, no. She threatened legal action, suggested I was taking advantage of a vulnerable elderly person, and implied she would report me to the Bar Association. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I had to smile at Diana's predictability. What happens next? She's requested a meeting with me tomorrow. I've agreed, on the condition that she comes alone. No lawyers, no doctors. I'll reiterate your position and provide her with copies of the documentation we've prepared. After that, it's up to you when and how you wish to speak with her directly. I considered this, watching a hummingbird hover near the feeder outside my window. I'll call her the day after your meeting. That will give her time to process the information. Are you sure? Tripp's concern was evident in his voice. You're under no obligation to subject yourself to what might be a difficult conversation. No, I assured him. But it's necessary. Diana needs to understand that this isn't a temporary situation or a negotiable position. Better to establish that clearly now than allow uncertainty to fester. After our call ended, I sat for a long time, planning what I would say to my daughter. Despite everything, I didn't want to hurt her unnecessarily. I just needed her to accept my decisions, about my living arrangements, about my money, about my life. The following day passed with unusual slowness as I waited for news from Tripp. I found myself unable to concentrate on my book or the small watercolor I had started painting. Instead, I spent hours sitting on my patio, watching the gradual progress of shadows across the garden as the sun moved through the sky. Elena noticed my distraction when she stopped by to check if I needed anything from the store. Difficult day? She asked perceptively. Just waiting, I admitted. My daughter will be learning about my new living situation today. I'm anticipating her reaction. Elena nodded understandingly. Family complications can be the hardest. When our mother came to live with us, our brother was convinced we were trying to steal her house. It took months before he understood we were only trying to honor her wish to stay out of a nursing home. Her empathy was comforting, a reminder that my situation, while painful, was not unique. Did he ever come around? I asked. Eventually, she said with a small smile. Once he saw how happy Mama was with us. The truth has a way of making itself known given time. Tripp called late that afternoon, his voice weary. Well, that went about as expected, he reported. Diana was initially angry, then tearful, then calculating. She brought up your age, your health, the trauma of losing Randy, and suggested you might not be thinking clearly. And your response? I provided her with copies of all our documentation, including the statement from Dr. Mitchell confirming that your decision-making capacity is intact. I reminded her that you're fully capable of managing your own affairs, and that your decision to leave Sunset Gardens was both rational and well executed. Did she ask where I am? Repeatedly. I maintained that I was not at liberty to disclose your location without your permission, but assured her that you're safe and well cared for. I also informed her that you plan to contact her tomorrow. How did she leave things? Tripp hesitated. She indicated that she needs time to process this betrayal, her words, not mine, and that she plans to consult with an elder law specialist about her options. I wasn't surprised. Diana had always approached conflict as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be overcome. She would see my assertion of independence as a challenge rather than a boundary to be respected. Thank you, Tripp, I said sincerely. I know that couldn't have been an easy meeting. All part of the service, he replied lightly. Will you be all right speaking with her tomorrow? Yes, I assured him. Whatever happens, it's necessary. That evening, I joined Maria and Elena for dinner in the main house, a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, vegetables from their garden, and Elena's freshly baked bread. Their easy companionship was a balm to my anxious thoughts, a reminder of the warmth that had been missing from my life at Sunset Gardens. After dinner, Maria showed me photographs of her family: 3 grown children scattered across the country, 5 grandchildren, and a new great-granddaughter born just last month. They don't visit as often as I'd like, she admitted. But they call, they send pictures, they remember. I nodded, understanding both what she said and what remained unspoken: the bittersweet reality of family love across distance, the varying degrees of attention and neglect that characterized most parent-child relationships in these busy, fragmented times. Back in my suite, I prepared for bed with a sense of quiet determination. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but also clarity. I would not avoid the difficult conversation, nor would I yield in my resolve. As I settled under the covers, I found myself reaching for Randy's side of the bed, a habit that persisted even after 2 years. In the darkness, I could almost feel his presence, his steady reassurance. "You're doing the right thing," I imagined him saying. "Stand firm." Morning arrived with soft rainfall tapping against my windows, a gentle spring shower that left the garden glistening and filled the air with the scent of wet earth. I took it as a good omen, a washing away of old patterns, a nourishing of new growth. After breakfast, I sat at my small desk, the phone before me, and dialed Diana's number. She answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting with the phone in hand. "Mom." Her voice was carefully controlled. "Trip Harrington told me you would call." "Yes," I replied. "I thought we should talk directly." A short silence followed. Then her words came in a rush. "Mom, what are you doing? Why would you leave Sunset Gardens without telling me? Where are you? Are you safe? You know you can come stay with us if you're unhappy there. We can make room, rearrange things. There's no need for all this secrecy." The offer to make room in her home, never extended during the months when she was arranging my move to Sunset Gardens, was so transparently calculated that I almost laughed. But I kept my voice steady. "I'm perfectly safe, Diana. I've moved to a private residence where I have my own suite but access to assistance if needed. I'm happy with this arrangement and intend to stay." "But why didn't you tell me?" The hurt in her voice seemed genuine, which made my response more difficult. "Because you would have tried to stop me," I said simply. "You would have questioned my judgment, possibly tried to involve my doctor, made me doubt myself. I needed to make this decision independently." "That's not fair," she protested. "I've only ever wanted what's best for you." "What you believed was best," I corrected gently. "But you never asked what I wanted. You decided Sunset Gardens was appropriate, arranged everything, and presented it as the only option. Because you were struggling alone in that big house. You weren't eating properly. You were forgetting your medication." "I was grieving," I interrupted. "And yes, I was having a difficult time, but there were many possible solutions besides placing me in a facility where I had no privacy, no autonomy, and was treated like a child." Diana's silence told me she was struggling to formulate a response that would regain control of the conversation. I waited, giving her time, but maintaining my position. "Mom," she finally said, her voice gentler now, adopting the tone she often used with Jenna when trying to redirect undesirable behavior. "I understand you're upset. Maybe we didn't handle things as sensitively as we should have. But these decisions about Sunset Gardens, they came from a place of love and concern. You have to believe that." "I do believe your intentions were good," I conceded. "But intentions aren't enough, Diana. I'm still a person with the right to make my own choices." "Of course you are," she agreed quickly. "No one's saying otherwise. But at your age, with your health concerns, you need support." That's all we were trying to provide. There are many ways to provide support, I pointed out. Deciding everything for me without my meaningful input isn't support, it's control. I heard her sharp intake of breath. That's not fair. We included you in the process. We took you to tour Sunset Gardens before you moved in. After you had already signed the paperwork and paid the deposit, I reminded her. The decision was made before I ever saw the place. The silence stretched again, longer this time. When she spoke next, her voice had hardened slightly. Tripp mentioned you've made changes to your will, significant changes. And there it was, the true source of her distress, finally acknowledged. Yes, I confirmed. I've restructured my estate to better reflect my values and priorities. By cutting out your own children? How does that reflect your values? I haven't cut you out, I corrected. I've reallocated the proportions and added conditions that align with what matters to me. Most of the estate will go to causes I believe in, with provisions for you and Keith if you choose to honor certain commitments. Commitments that require us to perform tasks you've outlined to receive what should rightfully come to us anyway, she countered, indignation rising in her voice. It's manipulative, Mom. And honestly, it feels vindictive. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this reaction was expected. It's neither manipulation nor vindictiveness, Diana. It's a conscious choice about my legacy. I worked alongside your father for 43 years to build that estate. It represents our life's work and our values. I have every right to determine how it's distributed. So this is punishment then? She asked bitterly. For putting you in Sunset Gardens? For trying to keep you safe? No, I said firmly. It's not about punishment. It's about recognition. Recognition that my needs and wishes matter, that my life isn't over yet, and that my resources are mine to allocate according to my own judgment. Another silence fell between us. I could almost hear her recalibrating, searching for a more effective approach. What about the house? She finally asked. We were planning to list it next month. The house is still in my name, I reminded her, and I've decided not to sell it yet. But it's just sitting empty. That makes no financial sense, Mom. At least let us rent it out so it's generating income for you. I'm considering my options, I said, deliberately vague. Tripp is handling the details for now. I could practically feel her frustration building. Over the line. Diana had always expected to manage my affairs, to have access to and influence over my resources. My sudden assertion of independence in both personal and financial matters represented a seismic shift in our relationship dynamic. Can I at least know where you are? She asked, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I'm worried about you, Mom. I just want to see for myself that you're okay. I hesitated. This was the question I had been dreading, knowing my answer would hurt her. Not yet, I said gently. I need some time and space right now, Diana. I'll reach out when I'm ready for a visit. So I'm just supposed to… What? Wait until you decide I'm allowed to see my own mother? The hurt in her voice was unmistakable now, cutting through the frustration and calculation. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I assured her. I'm just establishing new boundaries. We can still talk on the phone regularly. I'd like to hear about Jenna and Tripp Jr., but I need time to settle into my new situation without pressure or interference. This isn't like you, Mom, she said, a note of accusation creeping in. Dad would be so hurt to see how you're treating us after everything we've done for you. The invocation of Randy, wielded as a guilt tactic, sparked a flash of anger. Hadn't expected. Don't presume to speak for your father, I said, my voice sharper than intended. Randy believed in my strength and my judgment, even when I doubted myself. He would have supported my choices. The conversation deteriorated after that, with Diana cycling through further attempts at persuasion, guilt, and thinly veiled threats about seeking legal intervention. I remained calm but firm, repeating my position without engaging with her emotional escalations. I think we should end this call for now, I finally said when it became clear we were talking in circles. We're both upset, and continuing won't. Be productive. Fine, Diana replied tersely. But this isn't over, Mom. I can't just sit back and watch you make decisions that I believe are harmful to yourself and unfair to your family. I understand you see it that way, I acknowledged. But these are my decisions to make. I hope eventually you'll come to respect that. After we hung up, I sat motionless, the phone still clutched in my hand, feeling drained but oddly empowered. The conversation had gone much as I had expected. Difficult, painful, but necessary. Diana would need time to adjust to this new reality, to recognize that her customary methods of influence would no longer work. Whether our relationship could eventually evolve into something healthier remained to be seen, but I had taken the first essential step. Maria knocked softly on my door a little while later, bearing a pot of tea and a sympathetic smile. I thought you might need this, she said. I couldn't help overhearing parts of your conversation. Thank you, I said gratefully, accepting the comfort being offered. It wasn't easy. Family rarely is, she observed, pouring the tea into 2 cups and settling into the chair opposite mine. My oldest son didn't speak to me for nearly 6 months after I sold the family home. He felt I had erased his childhood memories without consulting him, even though he hadn't visited that house in years. Did you reconcile? I asked, warming my hands around the teacup. Eventually, she said with a small smile. When he realized, I wasn't going to bend to his guilt tactics or change my decision. Sometimes they have to exhaust all their strategies of control before they can accept the new dynamic. Her insight resonated deeply with my own situation. Diana has always been strong-willed, I reflected. Even as a child, she had very fixed ideas about how things should be. It served her well in her career, but it's made personal relationships challenging at times. And now you're disrupting her narrative, Maria nodded understandingly. You're not playing the role she assigned you, the dependent elderly mother who needs her decisions made for her. That's threatening to her sense of control. Yes, I agreed, struck by the clarity of her assessment. That's exactly it. We sipped our tea in comfortable silence, the gentle patter of rain against the windows providing a soothing backdrop to my turbulent thoughts. Maria's presence was a reminder that I wasn't alone in this journey, that there were people who understood and supported my need for autonomy without judgment. Later that afternoon, I was surprised by a text message from Keith. Diana called me in a state, it read. I'm glad you're standing your ground, Mom. Let me know if you need anything. Love you. His simple support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Perhaps there was hope for healing at least one of my family relationships. That evening, I wrote in Randy's notebook for the first time since moving to Maria's, recording the day's events and my feelings about them. The act of putting words on paper helped clarify my thoughts, transforming swirling emotions into coherent reflections. Today I spoke my truth, I wrote as the entry's conclusion. It wasn't received as I might have wished, but that doesn't make it any less true. For perhaps the first time since you left, Randy, I feel fully myself again, not just a shadow or an echo of who I once was, but present and whole in my own right. The path forward won't be smooth, but at least it's my path, chosen with clear eyes and a full heart. The social worker arrived the following Tuesday morning, a slight, gray-haired woman named Dr. Marlowe who looked to be in her 60s, with intelligent eyes behind fashionable glasses and a no-nonsense manner that immediately put me at ease. Tripp had arranged the evaluation as a preemptive measure, ensuring documentation of my mental competence before Diana could raise formal questions about my capacity to make decisions. Mrs. Barnes, she greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. I understand. You've had some significant life changes recently. Please call me Gloria, I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat in my small living area. And yes, quite significant. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Marlowe conducted a thorough but respectful assessment, asking questions about my daily activities, my understanding of my financial situation, my reasons for leaving Sunset Gardens, and my plans for the future. She administered several standardized cognitive tests, all of which felt remarkably simple, and observed me preparing tea and navigating my living space. "You seem to be adapting well to your new environment," she commented as we concluded. "It feels more like home in 3 weeks than Sunset Gardens did in 3 months," I told her honestly. She nodded, making a final note in her file. "Based on my assessment, Mrs. Barnes, Gloria, you are demonstrating clear capacity for independent decision-making. Your cognitive function is excellent for your age, your understanding of your situation is realistic, and your choices appear consistent with your values and preferences." "Thank you," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "Will you provide a formal report?" "Yes, I'll send my findings to Mr. Harrington by the end of the week. The report will document your capacity and your clear preference for your current living arrangement. Should anyone question your decisions, this will provide strong supporting evidence of your competence." After she left, I sat in my armchair by the window, watching hummingbirds darting around the feeder Maria had hung for me. The evaluation had gone well, better than I had dared hope. Another piece of protection in place, another step toward securing my independence. The rest of the day passed quietly. I tended to my container garden, read for a while, and spoke briefly with Keith on the phone. He was planning to visit in 2 weeks, he told me, if that was acceptable. The tentative way he asked, so different from Diana's assumptions, touched me deeply. "I'd love to see you," I assured him, "and I think you'll like it here." That evening, Maria invited me to join her and Elena for a movie night in their living room. We watched an old Audrey Hepburn film, sharing popcorn and commentary, laughing together at the dated elements and sighing over the romance. It felt wonderfully normal, the kind of casual socializing I had missed during my time at Sunset Gardens, where activities were structured and supervised like children's play dates. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized with a start that a full month had passed since my decision to leave Sunset Gardens. In that time, I had reclaimed not just my independence, but something more fundamental, my identity as a complete person with agency and worth beyond my role as mother, grandmother, or elderly dependent. The next morning brought unexpected news. Tripp called shortly after breakfast, his voice carefully neutral. "Gloria, I've received some information you should be aware of. Diana has been making inquiries around town, trying to locate you. She's contacted several retirement communities, independent living facilities, and even some private home care agencies." I sighed, unsurprised but disappointed. "Has she found anything?" "Not yet, as far as I know. Maria and Elena aren't affiliated with any of the formal elder care networks, which is working in our favor. But Diana is persistent. Yes, she always has been," I acknowledged. "What do you recommend?" "For now, just be cautious. Maybe limit your outings to less public places until Dr. Marlowe's report is finalized. Once we have that documentation in hand, Diana will have little legal recourse even if she does discover your location." After Tripp's call, I felt a familiar weight of anxiety settling in my chest. Diana's determination to find me, to regain control of the situation, was triggering old patterns of accommodation, the instinct to yield rather than stand firm against her will. Recognizing this, I deliberately redirected my thoughts. I would not allow fear to erode my resolve or diminish my hard-won peace. Instead, I called Juliet at Sunset Gardens, arranging to speak with her during her allotted time in the community room where residents could receive calls. "Gloria." Her voice was warm with delight. "How are you, my dear rebel?" I laughed, already feeling lighter. "I'm well, settled and happy. How are things there?" "The same dreary routine," she reported, "though your departure caused quite a stir. The nurses were in a tizzy for days, and the director had meetings with the staff about resident monitoring procedures. I'm sorry if it made things more restrictive for everyone. I said, genuinely concerned. Don't be. She dismissed my worry. It was the most excitement we've had since Mr. Abernathy set off the fire alarm trying to toast marshmallows in his room. Besides, you've become something of a legend among the residents, the woman who escaped. Her description made me smile. Any news on Mrs. Delacourt's cottage? Yes, actually. She's confirmed she's moving the second week of June. I've already spoken with the landlord, and he seems amenable to considering me as a tenant. Maria's reference was quite helpful. That's wonderful news, I said sincerely. Just a few more weeks then. I can wait, Juliet assured me. Knowing there's an end date makes all the difference. Oh, and I should mention, Diana came by yesterday asking questions about you. My grip tightened on the phone. What kind of questions? Where you might have gone, whether you'd mentioned any friends or places you were considering, if you'd seemed confused or disoriented before you left. I could hear the air quotes in her voice. I played the befuddled old lady, claimed I couldn't remember our conversations clearly, and suggested she speak with my son about my own memory issues. She lost interest rather quickly after that. Thank you, I said, relieved and grateful, for her quick thinking. Diana can be persistent. Indeed. A quality that serves one well in business, but can be rather overwhelming in personal matters. Be careful, Gloria. She struck me as someone unaccustomed to not getting her way. After our call, I spent some time in the garden with Maria, helping her plant tomato seedlings in the raised beds. The physical activity, hands in soil, sun on my shoulders, grounded me, dissipating some of the anxiety Tripp's call had raised. Everything okay? Maria asked perceptively as we worked. You seem a bit preoccupied today. I told her about Diana's inquiries, watching her face carefully for signs of concern or regret about her involvement in my situation. I'm not worried, she said firmly, patting soil around a seedling. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. If your daughter eventually finds you, so be it. She has no legal right to force you to leave. Her confidence bolstered my own. Thank you, Maria. For everything. No need for thanks, she replied with a warm smile. Having you here has been a blessing. Elena and I enjoy your company, and it feels good knowing the suite is being used as my mother intended, helping someone maintain their independence and dignity. That evening, I received a series of text messages from Diana. The modern technology still felt awkward in my hands, but I had been practicing with Maria's patient, guidance gradually becoming more comfortable with the smartphone Tripp had provided. Mom, we need to talk, Diana's first message read. I'm worried about you. Please call me. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to consider my reply. Diana had always used worry and concern as leverage, presenting her interventions as necessary for my well-being rather than acknowledging them as expressions of control. I'm safe and well, I finally responded. I'll call you this weekend. Her reply came almost instantly. Why not now? What's happening that you can't talk to your own daughter? The demanding tone, the implied guilt, these were familiar tactics that had worked on me for years. But sitting in my own space, surrounded by evidence of my capacity for independence, they held less power. I'm busy this evening, I wrote back, a simple truth that I had never before felt entitled to assert. I'll call Saturday morning. She sent several more messages, each more insistent than the last, but I set the phone aside, refusing to be drawn into her sense of urgency. This was another boundary I needed to establish, that my time was my own, that I would engage on my terms rather than responding to her demands. Later that night, alone in my bedroom, I held Randy's photograph close, studying his familiar features in the soft lamplight. She gets it from you, you know, I told him softly. That stubborn determination. You were just gentler about it. In the picture, Randy smiled back at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was truly happy. I could almost hear his chuckle, the way he would shake his head when Diana and I locked horns during her teenage years. "She'll come around eventually," he would say. "She's got your heart underneath all that fire." I wanted to believe that was still true, that beneath Diana's controlling behavior and fixation on my estate, there remained genuine love and concern. But even if that connection was irreparably damaged, I had made the right decision. My worth wasn't contingent on my daughter's approval or understanding. It existed independently, innately, a truth I had forgotten somewhere along the way and was now reclaiming with each day that passed. Saturday arrived with blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of Elena's roses through my open windows. I had arranged to call Diana at 10, giving myself time for a leisurely breakfast and a short walk around the garden to settle my thoughts. I wanted to approach our conversation with clarity and calm, not reactive emotion. At precisely 10 o'clock, I sat in my armchair by the window and dialed her number. She answered immediately. "Mom, finally. I've been so worried." "Good morning, Diana," I replied evenly. "There's no need for worry. I'm doing very well." "How can I not worry when you've disappeared and won't tell me where you are?" Her voice held that familiar mix of exasperation and concern that had characterized so many of our interactions over the years. "This isn't normal behavior, Mom. Actually, it's perfectly normal for an adult to make independent decisions about their living arrangements," I countered gently. "What isn't normal is expecting someone my age to surrender all autonomy. That's not fair. We never asked you to surrender anything. We were trying to provide the care you need." Without consulting me in any meaningful way, I reminded her. "But I didn't call to rehash old arguments. How are Jenna and Trip Jr.?" My deliberate change of subject caught her off guard. After a moment's hesitation, she began updating me on the children, Jenna's college applications, Trip Jr.'s baseball season, the summer plans that were taking shape. As she spoke, her voice gradually lost some of its tension, settling into the familiar rhythm of family news. "They miss you," she said finally. "We all do. The house feels different knowing you're not at Sunset Gardens, that we can't just drop by to see you." "You rarely did drop by," I pointed out, keeping my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. 3 times in 3 months. "We've been busy, Mom. You know that. Between work and the kids' schedules." "I understand busy," I interrupted gently. "I'm not blaming you for having full lives. I'm just pointing out that my absence hasn't actually changed your daily reality very much." A silence followed, heavy with unspoken thoughts. When Diana spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I spoke with Keith yesterday. He said he's planning to visit you. Yes, in 2 weeks. So he knows where you are." The hurt was evident in her tone. "He knows I'm safe and well cared for, just as you do. But he gets to visit and I don't? How is that fair?" I sighed softly. "Diana, Keith accepted my decision without trying to override it. He respected my autonomy. That's the difference." "So this is a test?" "I have to agree with your decisions. Decisions that I believe are potentially harmful and definitely unfair to your family, in order to be allowed to see you?" "It's not a test," I assured her. "It's about trust and respect. I need to know that if I share my location with you, you won't try to interfere or pressure me to return to Sunset Gardens." "I would never force you to do anything, Mom," she protested. "I just want what's best for you." "What you believe is best," I corrected. "But I'm asking you to consider that I might actually know what's best for myself." Another silence stretched between us. I imagined her in her kitchen, perhaps pacing as she often did during difficult phone calls, mentally calculating her next approach. "The changes to your will," she said finally. "Were those really necessary? Do you understand how hurtful that feels? To learn that your mother suddenly doesn't trust you enough to inherit what you and Dad built together?" "It isn't about trust," I explained patiently. "It's about purpose. Randy and I worked hard all our lives, yes, but not solely to provide inheritances. We wanted to make a difference, to contribute to causes we believed in. The new arrangements better reflect those values. By punishing your children if we don't jump through arbitrary hoops to prove our worth? By incentivizing behaviors that matter to me, I countered. Regular visits to my grave might seem trivial to you, but to me it represents ongoing connection, remembrance. The elder care advocacy training reflects values I've come to understand deeply through my own experiences. None of these requirements are arbitrary, Diana. They're meaningful expressions of what I care about. She made a small sound of frustration. So we're back where we started. You've made these unilateral decisions about your life and your money, and I'm just supposed to accept them without question or input. Yes, I said simply, because they're mine to make. The directness of my response seemed to stun her momentarily. In the past, I would have softened my position, offered compromises, tried to soothe her displeasure. But that pattern had contributed to where we now found ourselves. I love you, Diana, I added gently. That hasn't changed, but our relationship needs to change if it's going to heal. I can't be the compliant, dependent mother who exists primarily to fulfill your expectations anymore. I need to be a whole person in my own right. I never thought of you as anything less, she protested, but there was a new note in her voice. A hint of uncertainty, perhaps even the beginning of self-reflection. I believe you believe that, I said, but your actions have often suggested otherwise. Our conversation ended shortly after that, with no real resolution, but perhaps a small crack in the wall of misunderstanding between us. Diana had agreed reluctantly to think about what I said, which was more openness than I had expected. We arranged to speak again the following weekend, a schedule that felt manageable to me, frequent enough to maintain connection, but limited enough to preserve my independence. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and took it out to my small patio, needing the fresh air and quiet beauty of the garden to process my emotions. Standing firm with Diana was still difficult, running counter to decades of ingrained patterns where I had prioritized family harmony above my own needs. But each time I maintained my boundaries, it became a little easier, a little more natural. Maria found me there a while later, pruning shears in hand as she deadheaded spent blossoms from her rose bushes. "Successful call?" she asked, noting my thoughtful expression. "Progress, I think," I replied. "Small steps." She nodded understandingly. "That's usually how it goes with family. Small steps, some forward, some back." We worked together in companionable. Silence for a time, me with my container plants, Maria with her roses. The simple rhythm of gardening had always brought me peace, connecting me to Randy's memory and to the cycles of growth and renewal that continued regardless of human complications. "I've been thinking," Maria said eventually. "Mrs. Delacourt's cottage will be vacant in just a few weeks. Your friend Juliet might appreciate some help with the moving process. Would you like to invite her to stay here for a night or two when she first arrives? Elena and I could make up the sofa bed in the main house." The thoughtful suggestion touched me deeply. "That's very kind of you. I think Juliet would appreciate that." "I certainly would." "Then it's settled," Maria smiled. "I'll speak with Elena, but I'm sure she'll agree." This gesture of inclusion, of being treated as someone whose friends and relationships mattered, contrasted sharply with my experience at Sunset Gardens, where relationships between residents were treated as incidental, rather than essential to well-being. Here, at Maria's, I was a person with a life still unfolding, not merely a declining elder to be managed. The following days settled into a pleasant routine. Each morning, I joined Maria and Elena for coffee in their kitchen before returning to my suite for quiet reading or writing in Randy's notebook. Afternoons often found me working in the garden or taking short walks around the neighborhood, my confidence and stamina gradually increasing with regular exercise. Evenings might include dinner with my hosts or peaceful solitude in my own space, depending on all our preferences for the day. Trips Tripp called midweek with news that Dr. Marlowe's assessment had been completed and filed with his office. "It's exactly what we hoped for," he reported. "A clear, professional evaluation confirming your capacity for independent decision-making. She specifically notes your appropriate understanding of risks and benefits related to your current living situation compared to Sunset Gardens." "That's a relief," I said sincerely. "Has Diana made any further inquiries about my whereabouts?" "Not through official channels," Tripp replied, "though I did notice her car parked near my office building yesterday. I suspect she may be considering more direct approaches to gathering information. What should I do if she does find me?" The possibility, while not unexpected, still caused a flutter of anxiety. "Remember that you have every legal right to your current arrangements," Tripp assured me. "Diana has no authority to remove you or force you to return to Sunset Gardens. If she appears unexpectedly and becomes confrontational, you can simply decline to engage and contact me immediately." His confidence bolstered my own, reinforcing that my choices were valid and protected. I was not doing anything wrong by asserting my independence, quite the contrary. Thursday brought a surprise delivery, a package from Keith containing several photo albums I had believed lost during the move from my home to Sunset Gardens. A note explained that he had found them in Diana's garage while helping her store some seasonal decorations. "Thought you might want these," he'd written. They were in a box marked Mom, Storage, but seemed too personal to just sit in a garage indefinitely. "Looking forward to seeing you next week." I spent the afternoon turning pages slowly, revisiting memories captured in fading photographs. Randy and me on our honeymoon, Diana and Keith as children playing in the yard, family holidays and vacations spanning decades. The albums represented not just my past but my identity, the visual record of a life lived fully. That Diana had packed them away without asking if I wanted them, treating my memories as surplus to be stored alongside Christmas ornaments and summer patio furniture, struck me as emblematic of our larger disconnect. The most poignant discovery came in the last album, a series of photographs from Randy's 70th birthday celebration, just 6 months before his diagnosis. In one image, captured without his awareness, he was looking at me across the dinner table with an expression of such tender affection that tears sprang to my eyes. I had forgotten this moment, this particular quality of being truly seen and cherished by someone who knew me completely. I removed the photograph carefully and placed it on my nightstand beside the emerald pendant. Together, these two treasures would remind me daily of a love that had valued my happiness and supported my growth, a standard against which all other relationships in my life could be measured. That evening, I wrote to Randy in the leather notebook. "Found our photographs today, the ones I thought were lost forever. Seeing your face, remembering who we were together, I realized something important. You never asked me to be less so, you could be more. In all our years together, even when we disagreed, you saw me as your equal, your partner in every sense. That was your greatest gift to me, though I didn't fully understand its rarity until now. I'm trying to hold on to that standard in my dealings with Diana, not expecting perfection, but requiring basic respect. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. Not anymore." Keith's visit the following week marked a turning point in my new life. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, pulling into Maria's driveway in a rental car, his tall frame unfolding as he stepped out with that slightly awkward grace he had inherited from Randy. I watched from my window, a wave of emotion washing over me, relief at seeing him, pride in the man he had become, and a wistful awareness of how much time had passed since we had last been together. Maria greeted him first, directing him around to my private entrance. When I opened the door, we stood for a moment just looking at each other, bridging the gap of months and miles with silent recognition. "Mom," he said finally, stepping forward to embrace me. "You look wonderful." "It's good to see you, Keith," I replied, returning his hug before leading him inside. How was your flight? Uneventful, thankfully, but worth every minute of cramped seating to see this place. He glanced around my suite, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings, the personal touches I had added, the sunlight streaming through the windows. This is so much better than Sunset Gardens. You saw it? I asked, surprised. When? After Diana moved you there. I flew down for a weekend but didn't tell her I was coming. I wanted to see the place for myself. His expression darkened slightly. It felt institutional, not like somewhere you belonged. The revelation that he had come to check on me, to form his own assessment rather than relying on Diana's assurances, touched me deeply. Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, a gesture so like Randy's it made my heart ache. What could I say? The decision had been made, the contract signed. Diana was convinced it was the right solution, and you seemed resigned to it. I didn't want to create more conflict when you were already adjusting to so many changes. I gestured for him to sit, settling myself in my favorite chair by the window. I was resigned, I admitted. After losing your father, I didn't have much fight left in me. It took time at Sunset Gardens to remember that I still had choices, still had agency. Keith nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. Dad would be proud of you, you know, for standing up for yourself like this. I think so too, I agreed, touching the emerald pendant at my throat. We spent the day catching up on each other's lives, his work in environmental conservation, his relationship, with Melissa that was becoming increasingly serious, my new routines and friendships at Maria's. There was an ease between us that had been missing for years, a comfortable honesty that felt like rediscovering a favorite book long left unread. In the afternoon, we walked together through the neighborhood, my pace slower than it once had been, but steady. Keith pointed out birds I might have missed, named trees and plants with the expertise that had made him an excellent scientist, and told me stories about his colleagues and projects that made me laugh. Would you like to meet Juliet tomorrow? I asked as we returned to Maria's. She'll be visiting to see the cottage next door. You'd like her. She has your taste in literature and twice your vocabulary. I'd love to, he agreed readily. Anyone who helped you through Sunset Gardens is someone I want to meet. Over dinner with Maria and Elena, a lively affair with good food and better conversation, Keith fit in seamlessly, helping with dishes and asking thoughtful questions about their backgrounds and interests. Watching him interact with these women, who had become so important to me, I felt a sense of worlds connecting, of past and present finding harmony rather than conflict. Later, after he had gone to his hotel for the night with plans to return in the morning, I sat on my patio in the gathering dusk, reflecting on the day. Keith's visit had affirmed my decisions in ways I hadn't anticipated, providing external validation that I was indeed on the right path. More importantly, it had opened the possibility that family connections could be rebuilt on new foundations. Ones based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. If Keith and I could find our way back to authentic relationship, perhaps there was hope for Diana as well, though that journey would likely be longer and more difficult. The thought of Diana brought a familiar mix of emotions: love, frustration, sadness, and now a new element: determination. I would not compromise my hard-won independence to ease her discomfort with my choices. But neither would I give up on the possibility of eventual reconciliation, of a relationship transformed rather than abandoned. Some bridges needed to be burned so that better ones could be built. This understanding, gradual but deepening with each passing day, gave me both courage for the present and hope for the future. The day of Juliet's visit dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring morning. Keith arrived early, helping Maria and me prepare the small patio for lunch outdoors. There was a festive atmosphere to our preparations, a sense of celebration appropriate for what felt like a momentous occasion, Juliet's first step toward her own liberation. Tripp brought her at 11, her slight figure emerging from his car. with cautious excitement. She wore her best outfit, a teal pantsuit I recognized from special events at Sunset Gardens, and her silver hair was arranged with elegant precision. But it was the sparkle in her eyes, the straight-backed determination in her posture that struck me most forcibly. This was not a woman being relocated. This was a woman reclaiming her life. "Gloria!" she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "It's even lovelier than you described." Introductions were made all around, with Juliet charming Keith immediately with her literary references and sharp wit. Maria and Elena showed her through the main house to the backyard, where we could see Mrs. Delacourt's cottage beyond the shared fence, a compact white structure with blue shutters and a small front porch overhung with wisteria. "The landlord is meeting us there at noon," Maria explained. "He's bringing the keys so you can look inside." As we waited, enjoying lemonade and conversation in the dappled shade of Maria's patio, I observed Juliet closely. The transformation in her since my departure from Sunset Gardens was subtle but unmistakable, a new alertness in her gaze, a quality of anticipation that had been absent in the resigned atmosphere of the retirement home. "How have things been since I left?" I asked her quietly, while the others were engaged in conversation about the neighborhood. "Restrictive," she replied with a wry smile. "They've instituted new sign-out procedures, and the director gives monthly lectures on safety protocols for seniors. Your escape has become something of a cautionary tale. I'm sorry if I've made things more difficult for you." She waved away my concern. "Worth every irritation to know it can be done. You've become our Shawshank Redemption, Gloria, proof that the walls aren't impenetrable." The landlord arrived precisely at noon, a genial older man named Mr. Fincher, who carefully escorted Juliet through the cottage, pointing out features and answering her questions with patient respect. Keith, Maria, and I watched from the garden fence, giving them space but offering moral support by our presence. When they emerged 30 minutes later, Juliet's face told the story before she spoke. "It's perfect," she announced. "Absolutely perfect. Mr. Fincher has approved my application, and I can move in on the 15th. "That's wonderful," I exclaimed, embracing her. "Just 3 more weeks at Sunset Gardens." 3 weeks, 2 days, and approximately 7 hours, she specified with a laugh, but who's counting? Over lunch, we celebrated this next step in our shared journey toward independence. Keith engaged Juliet in conversation about her academic career, genuinely interested in her work on women poets of the Victorian era. Maria and Elena shared stories about the neighborhood, the best times for farmers' markets, which cafes had outdoor seating, where to find the most reliable handyman. The conversation flowed naturally, inclusive and warm, creating a circle of connection that stood in stark contrast to the regimented social interactions at Sunset Gardens. Here, we were individuals with histories, preferences, and futures, not generic elderly residents defined primarily by our limitations. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself observing the scene with a sense of profound gratitude. 6 months ago, in the fog of grief following Randy's death, I could never have imagined this new chapter unfolding, this reclamation of purpose and community that had seemed forever lost. Keith caught my eye across the table, raising his glass, in a small private toast that needed no words. He understood what this moment represented, this gathering of unlikely allies united by respect for autonomy and dignity in aging. His support, unquestioning and genuine, was a balm to the still raw wound of Diana's resistance. When Tripp returned to take Juliet back to Sunset Gardens, a temporary return with a definite end date, our farewells were light rather than heavy, anticipating reunion rather than mourning separation. 3 weeks, she reminded me, squeezing my hands in hers. "Save me some of those tomatoes you're growing." "First harvest is yours," I promised. Keith stayed for 3 more days, his presence a gentle counterpoint to the tension that had characterized my relationship with Diana. We established a new rhythm together. Morning walks, shared meals, Long conversations that ranged from philosophy to politics to family memories, all without the undercurrent of evaluation or control that had become so familiar to me. On his last evening, we sat together on my patio as twilight settled over the garden. Fireflies had begun to appear, their intermittent glow punctuating the gathering darkness like earthbound stars. "I spoke with Diana yesterday," Keith said, breaking a comfortable silence. "She knows I'm here with you." I nodded, unsurprised. "How did she take it?" "About as expected. Hurt, angry, convinced I've taken sides against her." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I tried to explain that it's not about sides. It's about respecting your choices. But she's having trouble separating her feelings about your decisions from her feelings about you as a person. It's always been hard for Diana to accept when things don't go according to her plan," I observed. "Even as a child, she struggled with circumstances she couldn't control." "She mentioned she's considering legal action," Keith added reluctantly. "Something about fiduciary responsibility and your best interests. I told her it would be a mistake, that it would only damage your relationship further, but she's fixated on the idea that you're being taken advantage of." I absorbed this information with resignation rather than alarm. Tripp had prepared me for this possibility, and Dr. Marlowe's assessment provided significant protection. "She won't succeed," I said with quiet confidence, "but she may need to try and fail before she can accept the new reality." Keith reached over and covered my hand with his. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Mom. I know how much you love her despite everything." "I do," I acknowledged, "and I always will. But love doesn't require surrender of self. That's something I had to learn. Perhaps too late in life, but better late than never." "Not too late," he corrected gently. "You have good years ahead, Mom. Years to live on your own terms." His certainty warmed me, reflecting the faith Randy had always shown in my resilience. "I hope Diana will eventually understand that this isn't rejection of her. It's affirmation of myself." "Give her time," Keith advised. "And in the meantime, keep building this new life that makes you happy. Your happiness might ultimately be the most persuasive argument." The wisdom in his suggestion struck me deeply. Diana had always responded to results, to demonstrable success. Perhaps seeing me thrive independently would accomplish what arguments and confrontation could not. When Keith left the next morning, our goodbye was poignant but peaceful. He promised to return within 2 months, and we established a schedule for weekly video calls, a technology I was gradually mastering with Maria's patient guidance. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said as we embraced at the door. "For what it's worth, I think Dad would be too." After he drove away, I returned to my suite, feeling the inevitable emptiness that follows a meaningful visit, but also a new sense of possibility. Keith and I had reconnected on adult terms, establishing a relationship based on mutual respect, rather than obligation. If this was possible with one child, perhaps it wasn't entirely impossible with the other. That afternoon, I wrote a letter to Diana. Not an electronic message easily dismissed or quickly answered, but a handwritten letter, requiring thought and care. I didn't defend my decisions or argue points already disputed. Instead, I shared details about my daily life, my growing friendship with Maria and Elena, my anticipation of Juliet's upcoming move to the cottage next door. I included a pressed flower from my container garden and a recipe for Randy's favorite lemon cake that I had recently rediscovered. "I miss sharing these simple things with you," I concluded. "When you're ready to visit without agenda or ultimatum, there's a place for you here. Not as my caretaker or my financial advisor, but simply as my daughter. The door remains open." I sealed the letter without expectation of immediate response, understanding that healing would come slowly if it came at all. But the act of reaching out without compromise of my essential boundaries felt right. A bridge extended across troubled waters, sturdy enough for crossing when the time was right. 2 events of significance occurred in the following week, Juliet's official move-in. Date was confirmed for June 15th, and Diana's certified letter arrived, containing formal notice of her intent to petition for guardianship. The latter came as no surprise after Keith's warning, but seeing the legal language, phrases like diminished capacity and protection of assets, still stung. Tripp called the same day, having received his copy of the notice. "This is entirely expected," he assured me, "and entirely without merit. Dr. Marlowe's assessment, your clear history of sound decision-making, and your current stable living arrangement all strongly counter Diana's claims." "What happens next?" I asked, sitting at my small kitchen table, with the papers spread before me. "We file our response, including all supporting documentation. There will likely be a hearing, though I'll try to have the petition dismissed before it reaches that stage. You may need to appear before a judge, but we'll prepare thoroughly if that becomes necessary." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, you continue living your life," Tripp said firmly. "This is a legal nuisance, not a genuine threat to your autonomy. Diana is attempting to use the system to regain control, but the system is designed to protect individuals like you from exactly this kind of overreach." His confidence steadied me, transforming what might have been a devastating blow into a manageable challenge. Diana's actions, while painful, were consistent with her character and therefore anticipated. Tripp had prepared for this possibility, from the beginning, building protective layers into our strategy. I chose not to respond directly to Diana's notice, following Tripp's advice to let the legal process unfold through proper channels. Instead, I focused my energy on preparations for Juliet's arrival, arranging for Maria's nephew Miguel to help with the moving process, organizing a small welcome dinner, selecting plants for her new patio based on her preferences. These practical tasks provided purposeful distraction from the hurt of Diana's formal rejection of my autonomy. Each seed planted, each meal planned, each arrangement made reinforced my capacity for independent living that her petition sought to deny. 4 days after receiving Diana's notice, an unexpected visitor arrived. I was tending my container garden when a taxi pulled up in front of Maria's house. The passenger who emerged, tall, lanky, with a baseball cap pulled low, was instantly recognizable despite his attempt at inconspicuous arrival. "Tripp Jr.," I said softly, watching my grandson pay the driver and approach the house with uncharacteristic hesitation. He spotted me on the patio and changed direction, coming around the side of the house with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. At 18, he had grown into his height, no longer the awkward adolescent I remembered, but a young man on the cusp of adulthood. "Grandma," he greeted me, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Hi. This is a surprise," I said, removing my gardening gloves. "Does your mother know you're here?" He shook his head, a flash of defiance crossing his features. "I borrowed my friend's car and said we were going to a baseball tournament in Springfield. Mom and Dad think I'm 2 hours in the opposite direction." The deception troubled me, but the effort he had made to find me, clearly having done some investigating of his own, touched me deeply. "How did you find me?" "Wasn't that hard?" he admitted with a hint of pride. "Uncle Keith mentioned the neighborhood when he was texting with Dad, and I remembered Mom talking about someone named Maria. I just looked up Maria's elder care services in this area and found the address. There is no Maria's elder care services," I pointed out, amused despite myself. Tripp Jr. shrugged. "Yeah, but there's a Maria Garcia who used to work for Home Health Connections." I figured it might be the same person, and the address matched the neighborhood Uncle Keith mentioned. His resourcefulness reminded me of Diana at his age. Determined, clever, willing to bend rules to achieve her goals. But unlike his mother's recent actions, Tripp Jr.'s detective work seemed motivated by genuine desire for connection rather than control. "Would you like to come in?" I offered, gesturing toward my suite. "I can make us some lunch, and you can tell me what brings you here." Tripp Jr. followed me into my suite, his eyes taking in every detail as if gathering evidence to report back to his mother. But when he spoke, his words surprised me. "This is nice, Grandma. Way better than that depressing place Mom put you in." "Sunset Gardens wasn't terrible," I said diplomatically. "It just wasn't right for me." He settled onto my small sofa, his long legs stretched out awkwardly. "Mom's really mad, you know. I've never seen her this upset, not even when Dad lost money on that investment last year." I sat across from him, studying the young man who carried echoes of both Randy and Diana in his features. "I imagine she is upset. Change is difficult, especially when it isn't your choice. She says you're not thinking clearly, that someone's manipulating you." He looked directly at me then, a flicker of his grandfather's forthright gaze. "But you seem fine to me. Better than at that other place." "I am fine," I assured him. "I've simply made decisions your mother doesn't agree with." Over sandwiches and lemonade, Tripp Jr. gradually revealed the purpose of his clandestine visit. The family atmosphere at home had become tense and combative, with Diana's anger and hurt spilling over into daily interactions. He had grown increasingly curious about the grandmother being portrayed as confused and vulnerable, wanting to see for himself whether these descriptions matched reality. "Mom's going to court to try to become your guardian," he said, confirming what I already knew. "She talks about it with Dad when they think I'm not listening. She's really worried about your money being stolen." "My money isn't being stolen," I explained gently. "I've simply made different plans for it than what your mother expected." Tripp Jr. nodded slowly. "The scholarship thing and the elder advocacy? Training. Mom mentioned that." He hesitated, then added, "It's weird, but that actually sounds pretty cool. Like your money would be helping people instead of just getting split up." His perspective, unburdened by entitlement or expectation, was refreshing. "That's exactly how I see it, too," I told him. After lunch, I showed him my container garden and introduced him to Maria, who tactfully avoided questions about how he had arrived or whether his parents knew his whereabouts. Instead, she engaged him in conversation about his baseball team and college plans, treating him with the respect young adults crave. Before he left, Tripp Jr. hugged me awkwardly but sincerely. "I'll probably get grounded for life when Mom figures out where I've been," he said with a wry grin so like Randy's it made my heart ache. "But I'm glad I came. I'm gonna tell her you're doing great and she should back off." "I appreciate the support," I said, touched by his loyalty. "But be gentle with your mother. She's struggling with changes she didn't choose or expect." After he departed, I sat in my garden thinking about the ripple effects of my decisions, how asserting my autonomy had influenced not just my own life, but the entire family system. Tripp Jr.'s visit suggested that perhaps my actions might eventually inspire others to question established patterns of control and obligation. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Juliet's move proceeded smoothly, with Miguel's help transporting her modest belongings from Sunset Gardens to the cottage next door. Her joy at claiming her own space mirrored my earlier experience, creating a shared understanding that deepened our friendship. Tripp kept me informed about Diana's guardianship petition, which was proceeding exactly as he had predicted. Slowly, with increasing skepticism from the court, as our documentation of my competence accumulated. The judge had ordered an independent evaluation, which only confirmed Dr. Marlowe's original assessment of my clear capacity for self-determination. By mid-July, Diana's petition was dismissed with prejudice, a decisive legal victory that formally recognized my right to make my own decisions. Tripp called with the news, his satisfaction evident despite his professional tone. The judge was quite clear in his ruling, he reported. He specifically noted that attempts to control an elder's finances and living arrangements against their informed wishes constitute a form of abuse, not protection. The validation was profound, not just of my specific situation, but of the broader principle that aging doesn't equate to surrendering autonomy. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. The lingering fear that Diana's resources or determination might eventually overcome my resistance. That evening, as Juliet and I sat on her new porch watching fireflies rise from the garden, I shared the news of the legal victory. "So Diana has no further recourse?" she asked, sipping her tea. "She could appeal, but Tripp thinks it's highly unlikely to succeed, and the process has been costly, both financially and in terms of her professional reputation." Juliet nodded thoughtfully. "What happens now between you and her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "The ball is in her court. I've made it clear I'm open to reconciliation on new terms. Whether she can accept those terms remains to be seen." 2 days later, as if in response to my conversation with Juliet, a message arrived from Diana. Not a legal document or formal communication, but a simple text. "Can we talk? In person?" With Tripp's encouragement and Juliet's support, I agreed to a meeting at a neutral location, a small cafe midway between our homes. Keith arranged to fly in for the occasion, providing both moral support for me and a moderating influence for his sister. The meeting was neither dramatic confrontation nor immediate reconciliation. Diana arrived tense but controlled, her initial formality gradually softening as our conversation progressed. Keith's presence helped bridge the conversational gaps, keeping us focused on the future rather than recriminations about the past. "I still believe Sunset Gardens was the safest option," Diana maintained, but added, "though I can see you're doing well where you are." It wasn't an apology, but it was recognition, a small step toward acknowledging my reality rather than imposing her perception. By the end of our lunch, we had established a tentative framework for moving forward. Monthly visits, with Jenna and Tripp Jr. included when possible, regular phone calls, and a moratorium on discussions about my financial decisions. As we prepared to leave, Diana hesitated, then asked the question that perhaps had been at the heart of her distress all along. "Are you happier now, Mom?" "Truly?" I met her gaze directly. "Yes, Diana, I am. Not because I've left you behind, but because I've found myself again." Something shifted in her expression then. A subtle softening, a glimpse of the daughter who had once delighted in my happiness, rather than focusing solely on my safety or utility. "Then I'll try to be happy for you," she said quietly. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. In the months that followed, our family slowly reconstructed itself around this new reality. Not the seamless unity I had once prioritized above. All else, but a more honest connection based on mutual respect. Diana's visits, initially stiff and awkward, gradually evolved into more genuine interactions. Jenna and Tripp Jr. became regular visitors, often stopping by without their parents, forming relationships with me independent of Diana's influence. The $5 million estate that had been the source of so much conflict remained structured, as I had designed, with the majority directed toward causes that reflected my values. But the significance of the money receded as our relationships improved, becoming simply one aspect of my legacy rather than its defining feature. On the anniversary of my departure from Sunset Gardens, Juliet and I hosted a garden party, bringing together the unlikely community that had formed around us: Maria and Elena, Keith and his now fiancée Melissa, Tripp and his wife, several neighbors we had befriended, and even Diana and her family. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around Maria's garden, I found myself standing slightly apart, watching the animated conversations, the genuine laughter, the easy interactions across generations. My emerald pendant caught the soft light, sending small green reflections dancing across my hand. "We did it, Randy," I whispered to the memory that remained ever present. "We found our way through." My daughter had left me at a nursing home, never expecting what I would do with my life or my estate. But the true value of my journey wasn't measured in financial terms or legal victories. It was in the dignity reclaimed, the boundaries established, the genuine connections formed. It was in the recognition, hard-won but profound, that my worth had never been contingent on what I could provide to others. It had been there all along, inherent and immutable, waiting only for me to claim it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.